Hey there. Before you listen to this week's Pen to Paper Press podcast episode, it is important to let you know the conversation I had with Richard Lyntton does contain sensitive material. I have silenced a small section due to its descriptive nature of what he witnessed. If you prefer to skip the section of the conversation where he talks about his experiences in war zone, pause the recording at approximately 22 minutes and fast forward to approximately 26 minutes. Please do not listen to this episode within hearing range of those who are sensitive to these topics. Portions of this episode are not intended for those under the age of 18. Thank you. Welcome to this episode of Pen to Paper Press podcast. I'm Cindy Kochis. I enjoy spending time with best-selling authors, writers, editors, publishers, and creative souls to talk about the process of developing our stories to completing our works of art. Each episode is an opportunity for us to explore mindsets, pearls of wisdoms, and the experiences that began our journey as a writer from the moment we put pen to paper. Richard Lyntton has joined me in the studio to talk about his experiences as an author and give us a realistic impression on how hard it can be. As he shared with me, if it is worth doing, it is worth doing well. In addition to being an author of North Korea Deception, his second book in the Deception series, Hyde Park Deception, is set to release the 1st of October. Richard, it is good to have you here. I could quite literally spend most of this episode sharing your biography, such as you served as a captain and tank commander in the British Army. You are a professional actor with roles in The Equalizer, Creed, Blue Bloods, just, to name a few. You have a television show in Philadelphia where you speak with local authors. And this list is extensive. I'm just scratching the surface. Thank you for taking this time to talk with me.
Well, thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here. Great. How are you?
I am doing well. And initially, I wanted to ask you, when do you have the time to write? However, for us writers, that is a calling that we can't deny it. Truly, we can't. So it's not a matter of making the time to write. It just happens. How does it happen for you?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question, Cindy. And I always ask that question of my guests on my local TV show here. But yeah, I think so originally, we're talking, 10 to 15 years ago when I began writing, I would go to my local cafe. In those days, everyone, cafe culture since before COVID, obviously, was very popular. So I had this wonderful routine. My two boys were very young. They're sort of kindergarten, nursery school. So drop them off, and then I would just go to the cafe, and I needed that hubbub. So I would have my routine of 2 or 3 hours in the morning in a cafe, in my local cafe. A couple of coffees, and because I was an actor as well, if I had an audition, I'd obviously take the morning off to go and audition, or in the afternoon. But I generally found that the morning time was best for me, and so I did that for several years. I would say 5 to 10 years. I had that regular routine. And then I stopped writing for a little while, acting took over a little bit. And then basically during COVID, suddenly we all had all this time on our hands. And my routine became, I used to do a mindfulness class. So what we did is every morning we did the mindfulness class at like 9 o'clock, from 9 till 10. And then I found that all the other time I would get up, say 5 or 6. I really started to get up early. And I found that was the secret to finishing off these 2 books that I had been writing for so many years, about 10 years. So I found in the last sort of year to 18 months that it's that early morning time, because there's so many other distractions now. My one son has now just gone off to college. I'm doing more acting. But I think, for me, I found that golden time, as I were, before the emails start coming in the morning, before there's any other distractions. You have to have that, what I call golden time. And then of course, 10, 11 o'clock, things start happening. And as much as you want to, you're out of the zone by then, and stuff in the day is happening. So, I know people sort of, have different times that they can, different amounts of time that they can put into writing, but whatever that time is, I find that if you can do it on a regular basis, that really helps. And if it's half an hour, if it's an hour. My other little habit to get into my writing in the early days was I would read my favorite author, which in the beginning was sort of, John le Carre or Daniel Silva, Michael Connolly. And I would just read a couple of chapters of their books because they inspired me to write in the first place. And I found that was a kind of helpful little thing just to get into my writing. And then I would sort of crack on.
Interesting. I find that a lot of creatives, as a whole, not just writers, that morning time is a sweet spot before, as you say, life gets busy, or the emails start rolling in, or the interruptions start happening. It's kind of like that sleepy time for the world, but us creatives are up and we're like digging in and doing our thing. One of the things I wanted to ask, because of the topics of your books, you're having to do a lot of research. I'm assuming that this is not all made up, that it's based on some factual. And because of your background, you're not doing the topical, on the surface kind of research, for the details. How much are you relying on your intuition when you're finding information? How much of your intuition kind of determines this is what I want, this is what I don't want, or are you strictly going by the technological, okay, this is the facts, this is what I have to write down?
That's a great question. I recently read, I think it was David Baldacci said, this one chapter he had written, he sort of read about, I don't know, something like 20 books or something. And I thought, well, that's a little bit steep. I'm not that sort of research oriented. But for the first book called North Korea Deception, it's a British journalist who is on assignment in the Russian Far East, and he becomes embroiled in a secret Western conspiracy to blow up a North Korean nuclear reactor. And I had been to that part of the world. It's a fascinating part of the world where China meets Russia meets North Korea. So that was sort of the first inspiration. But then I realized, in order to write about North Korea, I definitely had to do some research. I find North Korea fascinating, just like I find, East-West Germany fascinating, that idea of, the sort of wall and things change so very quickly behind that wall. So East-West Germany, North Korea, Russia, that sort of border there, China, like Israel, Palestine. I've always found those sort of that geographical proximity where things change very quickly. Even I live in Philadelphia, even Amish, or Amish country, I when I first got here, I just couldn't, I was so fascinated by that. I drove out to Lancaster County, and that sudden geographical shift in such a short distance. So for North Korea, obviously I did have to find out more about the history. I read about, I would say about basically I went on Amazon and I bought all the North Korea nonfiction books I could find. So that was probably about 8 to 10, if I recall. And, it's kind of tough, some of these nonfiction books, because they're very sort of academic. But, I got through it, and I just got some flavor. I got some tips. And to answer your question, I mean, it had to fit my story. I definitely was looking for snippets of truth to make the story real. And so, for example, one thing I discovered when I was researching North Korea Deception was that there was an area, there's the River Tumen, Tumen, and it runs through that area, sort of China, North Korea, and it's called the Tumen region. And I read that there was some sort of, United Nations economic aid or sort of plan for that area, rejuvenation. So anyway, so that was actually perfect for sort of my plot and help me to propel the plot forward. So I mean, mainly it is definitely how I feel the story should go. It's definitely not based on, facts don't really come, like the history doesn't come first. It's more, the story. It's all about the story, isn't it, really? So for me, especially as a thriller writer, because the most important thing, I'm not Charles Dickens or Emily Dickinson or whoever, I'm not a literary fiction writer. I'm a good old fashioned commercial fiction thriller page turner. That's what I aspire to be. That's what I try to do. And so, it's all about that next step, that creating that conflict and that unexpectedly. So in other words, the story is the most important thing.
Yeah, you're right. It's moving the reader through the book, not just flipping the pages. But
what kind of, I forgot if you told me, what kind of books do you write again?
Well, I have I have published two. One is a quote book and one is on journaling.
Okay.
It has journal prompts and so forth.
Right.
I have written I have completed two first drafts on fictional books. Definitely not thrillers. It's more of a general life kind of storylines. I am in the process right now of writing a memoir, and I have 3 or 4 other books that I've started, and one of them is more on a spiritual level. Another one is on, I would say, not a how-to, but more on creativity and how our health is reflected in our, how our health affects and adjusts our creativity. Because as having written, that how you feel and how your body is functioning, our foods impact so much of how we feel and our environment and so forth, and our stressors, how all of that impacts, it affects our creativity. And so that's the premise of one book that I'm also currently writing, kind of, sort of. Not a great answer, but anyways, right now I'm focused on the memoir. I kind of bounce between the creative book and the memoir, depending on where I'm at emotionally, because the memoir is kind of rough to go through. So
is that the main focus? Would you say the memoir is the first one going to be up on Amazon?
Out of the two of them, that is my goal. The memoir, because you're not aware of my history, and not everybody here in the audience is either. 4.5 years ago, my oldest son died. And a year later, I had to let go of my past. And in doing so, I decided to sell my home. And in order for me to heal from the grief of losing a child, I chose to basically disconnect from all things known. And that's why I'm in a camper. And I am 3 years in a camper, doing quote unquote the remote living or nomadic living, whatever they call it.
Yeah.
And I like remote living because I can move, or mobile living. Maybe I'll make up a new phrase. So that the story is not on my son, because that's his story. The memoir is me getting through the grief, and the intention of helping other parents understand that it's a journey that we are to walk, that we can't just lay in a heap of, I mean, still there are days where I would like to, lay in that heap of pile of tears, of wet Kleenex and so forth. But we have to live forward.
How did he die?
It was suicide.
Oh my goodness, that's really tough.
So yeah, it's been interesting to maneuver through all of this, and writing the memoir brings up a lot. And I thought I was emotionally ready for it, and at times I am, and at times I am not. So that's why I think I bounce between the two books. So
emotionally ready for writing the book or finishing the book, or something else, did you mean?
Writing the book.
Okay. Writing
the memoir. So
oh, that's really tough. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. Adds a whole different layer, doesn't it? The suicide thing. And then there's a sort of, I would imagine there's a sort of, I know someone at my local church that happened to, there's like a stigma that people, it's not just that someone died, but it's like people just don't know how to deal with talking to you about it, right? Or approaching you.
Correct.
So double layer of sort of, tragedy and people. And I guess I would imagine, I have no idea, Cindy, but I would imagine, most people tend to just sort of not try, and then people have found that they're sort of cut off, I would imagine. I don't know if that's how it was for you.
It's a very difficult, and it doesn't matter how the child dies. It really doesn't. The stigma is pretty much the same. It doesn't matter if it was due to a long illness or if it was an automobile accident. The stigma is still there, that people don't know how to talk to. They don't know how to talk to the grieving parent. They don't know what to say. The worst thing you can do is avoid them. I had people who would see me in the grocery store and would literally do a 180, walk back out of that aisle, or they would quiz me. And how did he die? Why did he die? And there were a couple of people who wanted the gory details. And it's like, are you kidding me? No, this is not.
I mean, if people say to you, how are you feeling? Is that, I always think, is that a silly thing to ask? It's like, well, how do you think I'm feeling? I'm feeling like, SHIT. I mean, what do you feel is the best thing to say to someone? Like, as we're talking about it, let's find out from someone, like, please tell me, because God forbid it happens again. But, I always think saying, oh, how you feel, how's it going, or how you coping, that's always sounds terrible to me, how you're coping,
Well, people would ask, how can I help you? And I would, initially, the first couple of months, I would bring my son back, make him come back, because that's where I was emotionally. And the thing that you can honestly do is talk to the person, talk to the grieving person without avoiding the topic of the child, because you'll know real quick whether or not we want to talk about our children. We want to talk about our children because to us they're still living. They're just not in the physical form. They're with us, for many of us, we can feel their presence, and we still have that connection with them. We just don't have the physical. And we want to talk about, that crazy thing that he did when he was blah, 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 or, oh my God, I remember the time he did such and such. We want to share that, and we want to not only share what happened with them, but to help keep the memories alive as well. Listening is the biggest thing, and for Pete's sakes, don't give us advice. And an individual, I won't go into much detail, after 2 weeks asked me, it was a man, asked me, when are you done with this grieving stuff? I'm tired of your crying. And I'm like, it's not like I broke up with my son. He's, he's gone. I will grieve forever. And basically that moment, that statement ruined a very long-term friendship. Mm-hmm. And it didn't ruin it. It shifted. I'll word it that way. It shifted our relationship. So
I mean, that's kind of fascinating, isn't it? How you can know someone and then just one thing they say or do, just literally you've known them for 5 or 10 years, say, and that can change. You just lose respect, basically. I mean, I can't give you any examples now, but it's happened to me, and you just think, I think I'm moving on from you now.
Well, it changes our. I was going to say, traumatic life experiences, and again, it doesn't matter what the experience is, because when traumatic events happen, our perceptions of what's important shift.
Yeah.
Obviously, you served you served in several wars. So how many times did your perception of basic life things shift? Your relationships shifted. How was it for you in that regard?
I mean, it's I was in Gulf War One. I didn't really see too much death and destruction there because we were freeing the Kuwaitis, and we were in the desert, and some of my colleagues, literally had to shoot Iraqi soldiers, but I didn't, so that was good. But in Bosnia, I did see some things in Bosnia. For example, there were 1,500 shells a day landing in Sarajevo when I was there.
Wow.
So yeah, it was crazy. I had a few close calls, but what happened for me, I think, when I finally met real death and destruction, which was, for example, in Croatia, when the Serbs were ethnically cleansed. So everyone knows about Serbs ethnically cleansing other people, but I was at UNTV at that stage, and we were doing a story in this little village about how Serbs were being, ethnically cleansed. And we saw this plume of smoke in the village, in the Plavno Valley it was. And so we went to investigate because we were a TV crew, we were UNTV, and every house was on fire. And we sort of passed this row of white vehicles with no military or police signals on the side except for one. And I just remember thinking, that's really odd. There were literally about 20 empty, minivans and SUVs. And we continued literally driving up this sort of stream, because it was almost there was almost to this little hamlet. And, there was a lady there, her house was on fire, she was crying. And she took us inside her house, and and her husband had been shot in the back of the head, and he was like 80 plus. He was lying in his pajamas on the floor. I always remember seeing like a chamber pot next to his bed. The image seared on my brain forever. And so basically these soldiers had come through and ethnically cleansed their village, basically. So they'd shot him, and we and then her friend, I couldn't even believe what I was hearing. She said, my friend's husband's been killed too. I said, what? And so she took us, a few houses up, and sure enough, her friend's husband, he was lying on the kitchen floor with his. And so what happened in the immediate sort of stage of that, terribleness for me was I kicked into sort of journalist mode. We literally filmed it, and I interviewed them. I thought that what is the best thing I can do for this situation, and that is tell people about it. And so, I literally just interviewed the woman, and I remember this. It's so funny. I remember making her start a sentence again because I wanted a full and complete sentence, so that when I cut it together for the story that I hope people would see, so I went into total sort of professional journalist mode.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you just afterwards, I don't know, I forget the specific question you were asking, but I guess afterwards it does give you a different perspective on life and appreciation of life. But also I found that when you get back into, say, normal world, so when I would come back to London on leave, and people would sort of say, oh, how was Bosnia? And I go, oh, it's pretty, it has its moments, or it's tough. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? Start telling them the explicit details of the murder and carnage I saw. Are they really interested? No, because most people just getting on with their own lives, they don't really care, really. And then if they really did care, then they would ask me more questions, and so I would, tell them a few stories. But I guess I'm going to touch wood. It wasn't personal for me. It was a job. I was a soldier, and then I was a UN TV producer, and so it wasn't. So I think, as much as I admire all these war correspondents that we see in Afghanistan and all over the place, and how brave they are, I think it's easier in a way because you're detached, right? It's your job. It's not like you. I can't even imagine what you went through. And my wife's brother died of drug overdose, so she's gone through that. So I've asked her a little bit about it, and then in fact his son, can you believe, also died of drugs. So I mean, it's just terrible, like sort of family what families can sort of slip into, tragedy, what they can beset. But anyway, she's probably like you. She's overcome adversity, and she's just full of positive energy, and she's made the best of it. And I think coming back to our original conversation where we started, I think one observation I guess I would have is that I presume, and again I don't know because it hasn't happened to me, but I presume you just have to decide which your fork in the road. Am I going to go down the miserable and sort of negative path, or am I going to just keep going and make the best of this? And it sounds like you're doing that too, going out and being positive when that sort of tragedy happens. I can't even remember if that answers your question, but I'll toss it back to you.
We were talking about my memoir and the premise, what the baseline for the memoir is, and then people's perceptions and how they, people, their reactions to those that are grieving, and it is a lot of not knowing how to do it, or not that they don't know how to talk to those that are grieving. They just don't have the understanding because they themselves have not been there. So it took me a bit to understand that they were doing their best to communicate to me that they were acknowledging me as an individual and as a mother. Because at first you want to take it personally, why are you asking me these questions, or why are you avoiding me? And it took me a long time to understand that they were avoiding me because they didn't know how to be with me. Yep. They didn't want to hurt me anymore, or they didn't know what to ask, or they didn't know what to say. So it's easier to just walk away.
Right.
And then our conversation shifted into the perception, how we perceive life after we've gone through a traumatic event.
Mm-hmm.
And, for me, I have a deeper sense of, I laugh deeper, I live deeper, I feel deeper. It's kind of like my grief expanded my heart and my emotions to really have a deeper sense of compassion and understanding for not only myself, but for the person beside me, or the person standing in front of me. I have I'm someone who doesn't hold judgment. I mean, yeah, I hold opinion, like anybody else. I'm human after all.
Right.
But I tend to not hold opinion because we're all people doing the best that we can. That's kind of my way I approach things. But I have a deeper understanding and compassion for how somebody else is feeling about whatever they're going through. And so my question was, with the traumatic events that you have gone through, because obviously I've not been where you have been. And so that perception, or the question was, what was the perception shift for you? And yeah, you shared that.
I remember being in a little, so I would go back and forth across the front lines, the confrontation lines, between the Bosnian Muslims in Sarajevo and the Bosnian Serbs on the outskirts. And it was, again, that was a fascinating experience, just sort of being able to go from, one world into the other in my UN vehicle with my blue beret. And I remember going, past the front line and literally the front line. What I mean by that, it was literally like a trench that you could stand up in, like First World War almost, and, with sandbags and a little wooden hut. And I remember I would meet the soldiers on the side of the road, crazy, and would stop and have a chat. And then they're literally looking at the Bosnian Muslim army, which was literally only like 50 to 100 yards away on the other side of this trench. And they occasionally take pot shots at each other and occasionally try and kill each other, if it was fierce fighting, or maybe someone would perhaps lob a shell in near them. So then they would start a firefight. I wasn't there for that, but they would, tell me stories on both sides of the confrontation line. So it was a really sort of interesting to me as a soldier and as a peacekeeper to talk to them. And I speak Bosnian, so I was able to actually communicate pretty well with them. But it sort of reminded me of this. I think it was a First World War movie I must have watched when I was like, I don't know, 10 or 12. It was black and white. I mean, this is years and years ago. And I just remember in the movie, the Germans and the British, they get up on Christmas Day and they walk towards each other with bottles of wine, and they literally started toasting with each other to celebrate Christmas. And they, because they had a ceasefire, and then they went back to their trenches and they started shooting at each other again. It was just so extraordinary to me as a kid. I just remember what a profound sort of impression that idea left on me, where you're killing someone one moment and then you're sort of friends with them next. And it was similar in Bosnia, because the guy, I remember sort saying, oh, my cousin, I saw my cousin the other day. I'm like, wait a minute, your cousin on that side? And he's like, yeah, he's Muslim, he's married to a Serb. They were all intermarried. They were Serb married Muslim, and it wasn't just Muslim. And then there were Croats. So there were like the three, the Catholic Church, the Croat, and the Serb was the Russian Orthodox Church. One put it simplistic terms, religion, and then the Muslim was the Muslim faith, Muslim religion. But anyway, and then so one of these soldiers, I remember, invited me to his house, and it was like idyllic little village, little porch, beautiful daughter he had, like she was 16. I interviewed her because I did a video. I was actually doing like a video diary for the BBC, which, by the way, I will, if anyone's following, I'll just tell you, the book trailer for book 2 is based on I used all original footage that I shot in Bosnia. So okay. If you look up Hyde Park Deception or on my Amazon page or on my Facebook page, you can find this book trailer. Anyway, so I went to this family, and the guy said, "Hey, let me show you my." He said, "I'm going to the front line. Let me show you look, here's my grenades." And he showed me like a belt of grenades, and here's my ammunition. He showed me, and he's wearing like a plaid shirt and jeans. And I said, well, and he had like a camouflage jacket. I said, is that your uniform? He said, yeah, there's nothing else. And he was wearing sneakers, and he was like, and I said, well, when you going back to the front line? He said, oh, I tomorrow, I have one day off. And so he was literally going back to this sort of trench thing. And again, this was for me, it was 1994, I guess this was. It was like going back in time in a sort of World War II movie. And then I came back again a few weeks later, and I said hello to the wife and the daughter, and I said, where's Darko? I think his name was, I forget, and they said he's disappeared. And basically, what that meant was, missing in action, and they were pretty 99% sure that he'd been shot and killed somewhere, in such a short space of time. So, I mean, again, and so I thought, well, what on earth do I do right now? I'm sort of, this official figure. They don't know me. I don't know them that well. So I just remember just sitting down and being, like you said, ready to listen, and, trying to be, well, I wasn't trying to be positive, because you can't be in that situation. But yeah, I just remember I had a lot of those experiences in Bosnia. I mean, there were people always dying, soldiers not coming back from the front line. So I guess as a United Nations military observer, I wanted to try and be empathetic and show empathy, especially as I spoke the language, and I guess do my tiny bit as a member of the international community, to just show that we weren't all about politics, and we weren't all about telling them how to live their lives, which is sort of what book 2 is about. It's set in Bosnia. It goes back to the hero Jack Steele, and he's now a United Nations military observer in Bosnia. And it's good old-fashioned commercial fiction, page turner. But I'm basically trying to show how incredibly hard it is, and complex and complicated and crazy war is, when you've got like 3 different sides, and then you've got an international community, and then you've got the Europeans, you've got the Americans, you've got the Russians, all with their interests, and you've got the death and destruction in the middle of it all, and it's also crazy and terrible and pointless. So anyway, that's just by way of saying that's sort of the inspiration behind book 2, Hyde Park Deception, which, as you kindly pointed out, is coming out on October 1st.
So how many books are you working on in this Deception series?
Well, I mean, it's however many I want. I mean, Daniel Silva, my hero's written 20. so I mean, I'm sort of starting to work on book 3, and it's I think one of the things as a writer nowadays, especially as an indie author, I found out pretty early on that you want to write a series, right? Because people enjoy series. I mean, I'm the same. I love a Netflix series. I'm much more likely to choose a Netflix series nowadays than a movie, because you get into it. And by the way, I have to say, just Fauda. If anyone hasn't watched Fauda, Fauda, it's about Israel-Palestine conflict, and there's 3 series on Netflix, and it's literally my favorite show of all time. I think I never watch a series twice, because I just get bored, because I know what's coming. But this is the one exception I made. So if anyone wants a great thriller series, political thriller, you got to watch Fauda, and there's 3 series. The acting's fantastic, the casting is fantastic, the story is fantastic. And I think one of the reasons it's so popular is because it shows both sides in a kind of quite a humane way, which is very, very hard to do with that whole Israel-Palestine conflict. But anyway, so oh gosh, where was I? Just lost my train of thought. So Do you remember where I was?
We were talking. You had just brought up taking being an indie author. So go ahead.
The series thing. Yeah. So anyway, so one of the business decisions I made was, I thought, right, this is going to be a series. When I sort of finally decided at the beginning of COVID to publish the books, I just thought I've got to just go through them again and make sure that they're going to be a series. So it's book 1, book 2, and I came up with this series name, the Deception series. And then there are all sorts of business reasons and Amazon reasons, and why you want a series. And so so that's what I decided to do. But to answer you, I mean, many more, hopefully many more. It's just writing a book. There's so much to talk about, but I'll just start by saying, it's 35% is the writing, and I hate to tell anyone out there who wants to publish, but then it's like 75% marketing and all the BS that goes with that. I mean, I literally spent months and months and months just listening to courses and videos and free videos and how to publish videos. And it's just never ending. I just give you one example of how complex it gets. Like, so Amazon, I have a marketing account in 13 different territories: UK, Canada, Australia, Italy, France, Germany. And so you're managing all these accounts. And then in each of those territories, you're allowed 10 categories of where your book is. So mine could be a military fiction, it could be military political espionage, it could be mystery, thriller, suspense, it could be Eastern European. There's all these different categories, but and each category is a chain of about 5 or 6 words. But every territory has its own way of classifying these categories. So you literally have to sort of go through each territory and say, okay, that's a thriller book, a political thriller. What are all the categories? And then you have to sort of enter all these different categories for your ebook and your paperback, which are also different. Right. And that's just one example of the insane detail, the insane never-ending list that there is when you publish, whether you're traditionally published or indie published. You still got to get out there and get your book to the readers, who like your stuff. It's crazy.
It is crazy. And one of the topics that keeps coming up lately in the podcast is writers not wanting to, or questioning whether or not it's worth hiring an editor, hiring a PR person, hiring somebody to help you market. And a lot of
Well, let me interrupt, because
go for it.
Yeah, I definitely kind of disagree with the premise of your question there. If it's worth you have to hire a professional editor. I mean, there's just no question about it. Your money, let's say you had $3,000 to $5,000 to spend on everything. A professional editor to do 2 passes of a manuscript of, say, 340 pages for 100,000 words. My novels, I think, is about 100,000 words. So they're going to charge you probably between $1,500 and $2,000 to do a professional edit. And the first time I did my book, so I did the editor. That was where the bulk of my money was spent, and there's just you're wasting your time if you think of you're going to publish a book without, and I mean a professional editor. Like my editor is called Change It Up Editing, Candice Johnson. Like, she does nonfiction, she does fiction, but not someone who you just found on Fiverr who calls himself an editor. So I just want to be really clear about that, because I just don't want to get any doubt with people thinking they don't need an editor. And you're going to ask Aunt Joan, because she was an English teacher or something. That just doesn't work.
Thank you.
And if you haven't got the money, then you just got to go out and earn the money until you've got the money, because it is so competitive. Like, once you put your book up there, you know, it's really up there and it's really exposed. And people, I read another article once and it said that the guy was a book reviewer and he said, you know, if there's more than 50 typos in a manuscript, that's really not good. And I hope, and I'd like to think my first book, North Korea's Deception, does not have that. Well, I know it doesn't because I haven't had any feedback that it does. But you know, that was a, you know, an editing process, 2 passes. Then there was a proofreading phase, and that was another $1,000. Now I've gone back and forth on the second book, because when I did the audiobook for the first book, I found things, but I didn't find too many things. I mean, I read it, the entire thing out loud, so I really found stuff, you know. But it was, you know, 12 to 20, I would say, major sort of, you know, repetition of words or missing commas or something. It wasn't too crazy. But my point is, you know, a proofreader, again, you really should hire a proofreader, which is different from an editor. You know, really just catching the sort of double space in between words, or a not aligned paragraph, or a typo, or, you know, a word is, you know, gouge instead of gauge. Someone caught for me the other day in my second book. Now I heard Mark Dawson, who is a big indie author person, he does lots of courses. I'm sure people have heard of him, and if you haven't, then you need to find out about it. So Mark Dawson, who's English, does a lot of courses on how to write books and publish books. And then David Goffran, Gaughran, is another fantastic resource, free resource mostly, written tons of book on how to publish. But anyway, they talk about, you know, proofreading, and you can sort of get people on your email list. I've got like I won't say how many people I've got on my list at the moment, but it's getting up there, and some of those people have volunteered to read my book, so you can get them to maybe give some. This is my second book. That, you know, some of those people will actually give you physical sort of corrections if they want to. You know, it's up to them. Yeah. So, you know, if you have like 5 or 10 advanced readers, that's another way of getting your proofreading done. And then another way, obviously, again, I didn't do this. Like, I didn't do this the first time. I didn't, and this is going to sound really obvious, but, you know, before I gave it to my editor this time on the second book, I read my book out loud, physically out loud. Now, people might say, well, didn't you do that before? I just sort of maybe mumbled, you know, I would go through and I would mumble, but not out loud as if I'm reading an audio book. And and it took me, when I did it for book 2, before I gave it to my editor, Candice, you know, it took me probably 2 weeks to just be able to spend 2 hours a day reading, say, 2 chapters a day out loud. Anyway, so these are some of the things that you've got to think about. And there's so many people out there, because you can, like, physically, you can just publish your book now on Amazon and other platforms. Mm-hmm. You know, the competition is that much greater. So you've got to be good. You know, it's just not worth doing unless you're going to do it properly. You know, people typeset. I have a book, and the other thing is that I have an interior book designer, and you know, he's very reasonable hourly rate. And, you know, again, for me, instead of trying to do it myself, and there's mistakes and the stress, especially when you're publishing a book for the first time, you know, I would recommend, my one is called The Book Couple, Gary Rosenberg, but, you know, they will take your manuscript, your docs file, and they will, you know, transform it into what it needs, the EPUB file. Now that filled me with horror when I didn't. And I know you can learn how to do that, but again, it's just another headache that you don't need. And if you can spend a couple of $100 on getting that interior book designer. But just to finish my mini lesson on my publishing experience, the other main source of income, the other main source of expense must and should be your cover designer. And, you know, I know you can get covers, like you can get generic covers and you can put, you know, your title on, which again, I just think you can sort of spot a mile away. Yeah. And so what I did is I spent a lot, you know, several $100s on a book designer. and I love him, and he's great, and he's done 2 covers for me, and I think they're spectacular.
Mm-hmm.
The way I did that was I actually went into Barnes and Noble, and I literally just looked at the covers, thriller genre covers, and I turned the page over, and I tried to find out which publishing company, and sometimes the book designer themselves has their name in the cover. And I literally reached out to this guy on LinkedIn, and a couple, 2 or 3 I reached out to, and 2 of them didn't get back to me at all. But this one guy, it was a quiet Sunday. I remember it was really fun, and he got right back to me, and then we were on the phone together. And I loved all his covers, and he'd written, he'd done covers for like big time authors. So I was like in awe. I was, so exciting to meet like a real book designer cover. But anyway, so my point is simply, I did end up hiring him, and he sort of gave me a special indie rate because, he works for the big publishing houses. So, really recommend. I'm so proud of my cover, and it's been, now I just did a book signing at Barnes and Noble, and they did this wall of like 20 of North Korea Deception. It looks so cool just seeing all the cover, and I'm just so, every time I see the cover, I'm just pleased that I spent the money on it, basically. So anyway, so that's I'm not sure where we started on that one.
Hey, it's all good, because one of the questions I was going to ask you, because you do interview local authors and that was going to be one of the things that I asked was, what is something that you consistently hear from writers? What is the consistent pearl of wisdom that they have to share? And about writing and getting published. And I think you hit it all.
Oh, really? Well, I'm not, maybe. I mean, I do ask that question. And I think, I think that, actually one thing I said, which I didn't just say once, because someone asked me that the other day at my book signing, what pearl of wisdom, and I think, you got, well, all that stuff that we just talked about is kind of admin and background BS and marketing and business, and it has to be done. I'm sorry, it really is 3/4 of the work. And if you don't want to do all that, then you might be lucky and talented enough to get an agent and a publisher. I mean, I tried that like 5 or 6 years ago. And then it was such a long process. You apply, and then you might hear back from agents within 3 or 4 months sometimes. And then even if you were lucky enough to get a deal, it will be like another 18 months or 2 years before you're, and then apparently, like, if you want to go and do a book signing, you sort of have to ask permission of your publisher. So anyway, I decided I'm not doing all that. But then it's easy to make that decision, but then you obviously you're giving yourself a ton of work, because you've got to do everything. Then you're the publisher, you're the marketer, you're the, you do things like this, the podcasts and getting your name out there. One thing I would also say to people is that, you've got to be passionate about that one story that you have. And that is key, because you're going to go through that. I mean, I must have done 20 drafts of my manuscript for the first book, but because the story, I was always really excited and interested about my story, this idea of North Korea and China and Russia, that sort of kept me going. And so when people ask me that same question that you just asked, that's another thing I would say, is that you've got to find that seed of your story that really, excites you, because you're getting up at 5 or 6 o'clock, and you're going to be spending 2 or 3 hours with that story. And then once it's finished, you've got all the editing and the proofing. So you've really got to believe and be passionate about your story. And the same with this book too. For me, it was Bosnia. Bosnia was so fascinating for me. I really wanted to try and give people an idea of what it was like to be, a United Nations military observer in Bosnia. So, I came up with this sort of, James Bond-esque type scenario, plan, story, plot, but it's based on me being it. And one of the things I get from my readers, which is really nice, is they say, I can really tell that you've been there, whether it's on a Russian train in the Russian Far East in Vladivostok, or whether it's in Moscow, or whether it's in Bosnia, in being shelled with 1,500 shells a day in Bosnia. They can tell I've been there.
Mm-hmm.
That's really nice for me.
Well, and that is an important element in the story, is being able to feel, as you're reading, to slip out of your mind and into the character, and to feel what they feel and see what they feel and smell, absorb the five senses of the person that you're reading. And that's a gift. And you don't get that if you haven't been there, or if for those that, like Steven Spielberg, obviously Star Wars, he wasn't up in space, but
right.
He mentally was able to put himself there.
It's a mix of the two, isn't it? It's a mix of the two. I mean, I wasn't in the presidential palace in Pyongyang, in the North Korea leader, and I that was obviously total embellishment. There's a scene where he's like, we say in English, stroking his cats, petting his cats, you guys say. But anyway, so I remember thinking, well, how do I imagine him sitting there with his peach colored satin cushions and so that was one example where it was totally made up. Obviously no research available.
No, they don't give that away. That's not something you can Google.
But no, so I think that is the point. It's being able to do a mixture of both, right? To use your own experiences and then make stuff up if you need to, sort of use your imagination. I remember my mother used to say to me, "You've got a very vivid imagination," and I think that was true, and probably is true, and I've used that in my writing.
Is there, we have covered so much ground, and at one point you were actually interviewing me, so kudos. I can tell you're somebody who professionally interviews people.
Actually, to that point, I just did want to add that. So you mentioned the TV show. So yes, I do. You can find the show. It's called Author Hour. If you go on YouTube and put Author Hour with Richard Lyntton, and Lyntton is spelled Lyntton. So it's called Author Hour with Richard Lyntton, and that fell into my lap. But I just tell people about it as an example of you can meet. I interview non-fiction and fiction, thriller, whatever. They just have to have a local connection. It's local TV here. It's my local, what do you call it, public service TV or whatever it's called. But anyway, the point is that you have to, again, another thing you have to do once you're published, is you have to find a way of getting your name out there. So this was funny because it literally fell in my lap. I mean, I went to my local library and I said, would you like my book? And they said, oh yeah, great. They knew me from way back. I used to take my kids in there when they were 2 and 3 years old. So they sort of knew me, and I said, I'm on QVC. I sell food on QVC. And they were like, oh, well, wait a minute. You should meet the folks at Radner TV. Because he's looking for a host for the new show on writing. So it was a perfect match. I'm used to being in front of the camera as an actor, so it wasn't difficult for me to. The hardest thing is just finding new people, which isn't hard now once I've done a few episodes, because sort of people come. But anyway, my point is you've got to find ways to get your name out there, whether it's writing, like you're doing a podcast, or whether it's writing articles or blogs. That is another, I say unfortunately because it's work, but that is another big part of being successful. You have to find a way of getting your name out there, because then people will look you up, and then they'll see that you've written a book, and then they might buy your book. So I just wanted to mention that is another part of the sort of social media / media game that you have to do.
Yeah, it is. And as writers, we tend to be reserved, or I don't want to say antisocial because that's incorrect. We just tend to be solitary individuals, and putting ourselves out there is like, I gotta do what? You want me to go what? Where? I don't want to do that. I don't want to be seen. I don't want to be,
Right.
I like my little silent, safe
I know.
place.
But let's face it, it's so much better now. I mean, I don't know. I don't mind going local, but the thought of having to do like a book tour all over the country, and you go to bookstores and there's like, 10, 20 people there. I mean, that's a tough, I mean, that you have to do that, and maybe that will start happening again. But let's face it, with the Zoom thing, I know that Daniel Silva just did a virtual book. All these big writers are doing that now, and I mean, it's just so much easier, isn't it? Let's face it, than go. But then on the other hand, I like to interview people in person for my TV show, and I feel there's a big difference between just doing it on Zoom and being in person. So all my people so far have been in person, and because I just feel like people are really kind of fed up with seeing people on Zoom, right?
Well, human touch. I mean, there's something about being in somebody's space and being able to reach out and shake their hand.
Yeah.
And there's that human touch thing is, it's priceless. So, but I'm not inviting people into my camper. For one, there's not enough room.
It looks cozy. I wish I was sitting with you. It looks really cozy.
It is cozy. I definitely not big enough for, a whole lot of people in here, but
people know, do you tell people that you Zoom your podcast? Do people know that you're sitting, that we can see each other?
What's really interesting is with the podcast recording, perfect example, and I've mentioned this in other podcasts, is the episode with Crystal Cockerham. I believe it's episode number 8. Mm-hmm. We started recording our interview, and yes, people know that I'm recording this on video, but I'm using the audio. And the owner of the campground was mowing the lawn. So you'll hear the mower come, and then wait, the lawnmower is going away.
Oh gosh, yeah.
We would pause when it was getting loud because he was next to the camper. So there would have been no way that anybody would have heard a word we said. I've also had times where, I've had big semi trucks go past at other campgrounds, or I've had people in the next campsite make lots of noise, or dogs, or my dog, So, but with like Martine Felton, and I can't remember which episode she's in New York City, and so we hear the sirens go by, so I think, to me, that is one of the really unique elements that I have, is that I'm not in a closed-in studio that's soundproof or whatever. Life happens not only, in the camper, because again, I've got a dog who occasionally barks or crunches on his dog food, but life happens outside of, quote unquote, the virtual studio. So, and I think that's a unique thing, because life is messy. Life is not, studio living. It's not.
Exactly.
Yeah. Some days it would be nice, because I think we get more sleep if we didn't have all that stuff going on outside, but but that's a whole different story for a whole nother day. So anyways, obviously, Richard, you and I could talk for hours. That is quite clear, because you and I have definitely hit a lot of territory. We've crossed the oceans, and we've been in war zones. We've been in, all sorts of different places. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you would like to close with?
No, just to say thank you for having me, and keep writing, everybody. One word, one page at a time. it is never ending. Like this, the to-do list of a writer is basically never ending. There's always something you can do. So just know that, you've got to be able to switch gears. You've got to be able to concentrate on the thing you need to do right now, because that's the other thing. Otherwise it will devour you, and you'll become, and anyone who's done their first book knows this, it just becomes so all-consuming because there's so much to do. And I just promised myself on the second book that I would just learn to say, okay, it is what it is, don't worry about that, what have I got to do right now for the next hour or so. So Hyde Park Deception, it is on pre-order right now. We're in August, so it comes out October 1st on Amazon. It will be in paperback, hardback, and I will be doing the audiobook. That won't be ready just yet. Please, and visit my website. Drop me an email, richard@richardlyntonbooks.com. If you have any questions, you can sign up for my email list. And the more the merrier. And always happy to answer questions about writing if you want to reach out to me.
Of course. And I will have your website on the show notes page. And Richard, I thank you. Thank you so very much for taking the time to be here with me. Before we end our time together, I'd like to say thank you for listening to my conversation with Richard Lyntton. To access his website and purchase the books he has written, visit the show notes for this episode at pentopaperpress.com/podcast. To receive future episodes in your inbox, subscribe to the Pen to Paper Press newsletter. And of course, subscribe to this podcast on your favorite application. Take care, and until next time, keep your pen to paper and write. Your words have power. Your story matters. Bye for now.